So we're going to be reviewing Star Trek Picard. This takes place 20 years after Star Trek Nemesis. You recall that that Star Trek Nemesis came out in 2002. At this point, Jean-Luc Picard is retired, and he's living out his life, trying to catch up on the past. And the way the series pitches him, this is Star Trek Picard, mind you. So it is not Star Trek as much as it is a Star Trek hero's journey. In this case, the greatest hero, Captain Picard, now Admiral Picard, who is struggling. And that is probably the first ding that I give this series. I don't mind sort of a deep look into a character, but the way the show tries to go through and pick up on everybody from past episodes and gradually give everyone their nostalgia pills, bringing in John D. the Q in season 2, introducing some nice new characters that worked pretty well, bringing back Jerry Ryan, who played 7 of 9, and so forth and so on. Brent Spiner, of course, as the remaining images of Data, and then Adam Soong, the progenitor of Data. So there are some things. Annie Wershing is the Borg Queen. Yes, the Borg is back, and throughout it all, what they tried to do with the Borg is actually one of the most credible things about this series. Now, let me stop here and mention, I'm going to mention some spoilers, but I'm not going to go too far with any one of them. So it is not my goal to spoil too much. However, if you're really picky, go ahead and turn this off at this point and just say that I'm going to give it a C+. Overall, the grade that this gets is a C+, which means if you are a Trekaholic or a Trekkie, you do want to see this because you want to see what they did with things. However, that's being generous. Really, this kind of deserved to fail. It deserved to fail because all it tried to do was personalize and sort of make more relevant all of the themes of Star Trek, which used to be based in the days of the original series on imagination and exploring human meaning. And now, since the Next Generation, it didn't even, the Next Generation at the time, when it aired at the end of 1987, it was heavily criticized for borrowing a lot from the original series Star Trek. Well, this doesn't do that. This just goes the way of Gen Z, people born after 1997, and goes for a quick gratification, and then it tries to throw in some nostalgia along the way. So it involves, and instead of involving Data's daughter, those of you who remember the original Star Trek series remember that Data had a daughter named Lal, who failed. He tried to create one like him, and it failed. So when I first saw this, I thought that was the direction they were going to go when I saw the previews for the first season of this. But it didn't go in that direction at all. Instead, it took Issa Briones, who plays Soji, and brings her in through both seasons, gives her a backstory, but it does so in a way that really doesn't lend a lot of credibility. I can get on board with it, but it really didn't do a very good thing for the show overall. You have newcomers like Evan Evagora, the teen heartthrob from Australia, who plays Elnor, the Romulan ninja guy, which I thought was kind of cheesy. One of the more likable characters is Santiago Cabrera, who plays Cristobal Rios, who's the captain that initially takes off with Picard. And then you have Raffi Musiker, who is played by Michelle Hurd. She's also does a lot for the series because she has a very, very staunch personality who does add credibility in her less than likable way. She and the dynamic with she and Jerry Ryan, although it's somewhat typical of our civil rights obsessed, pro-gay culture sort of thing, I can get behind it, but not as much as, I don't think they needed to take it in the direction they took it. As I mentioned with the Borg Queen, Annie Wershing, she's been in a lot of things. She does a really good job with the Borg Queen, who seems never to die. No matter what time you come in, there's just no way to really kill off the Borg, because they're just too interesting, because they're too, like all of the other hat races, like the Klingons and Romulans and Ferengi, and they're just too much fun because they put humanity in too good a light. humanity always represents diversity in the Star Trek world, and the Romulans represent cunning, and the Klingons represent anger and savagery, different phases of humanity. And the Borg represent the lack of love. Computers taken over. It's a subconscious fear, and if you didn't pick up on that, you haven't watched the show very much. Sol Rodriguez plays Dr. Teresa Ramirez, who has a thing with Cristobal, Captain Rios, and I do like what they did with that. I think it was good. Now here's the thing, folks. I understand that Hollywood is extremely liberal, and they hate conservative voices, and of course nothing in any frame of Hollywood is an accident. So when they go back in time to the year 2024, they end up with a scene where it shows a bunch of Hispanics being put in cages, and of course they capitalize on that with the liberal Democrat narrative, and they say, oh, well, this is how they treat people. They put them in cages, and it's cruel, and shipping people back to the border. We didn't need that. We just didn't need that. But I'll get past that but that's something that you would expect. But it's disrespectful of Star Trek fans to throw stuff like that into the series when it's just not necessary. But they couldn't resist, and so they portray 2024 as a pre-apocalyptic mess of hatred and disorganization and paranoia and selfishness. Well, that happens not to be true is the problem. And then they never address this in the film, that with all of the messed up timelines they keep creating. And indirectly the Q keeps creating, and the Borg keeps creating. They don't address their own selfishness. Instead, they look at themselves as technotopia heroes, and how everybody in the future loves everybody, and nobody uses money. It's a communist narrative, and it really is nonsense. And I think it ruins the show in a lot of ways because they play that up incessantly. And of course, what do we get along the way? We get all sorts of botchings. They keep using, for instance, the same keyboard and computer touchscreen sounds that are in the future in the past, in the year 2024. They do quite cleverly capitalize on the 2025 Europa mission we have scheduled. But they change it a little, and they involve one of Jean-Luc Picard's ancestors. Which, okay, I'll get on board with that. To me, it just seems like they really didn't need to go in that direction. But for those who follow science and who follow astronomy and who follow space, that is a cool thing they tied in there. It's just not going to help. Now, watching from the first season, what you'll be struck by is the convenient plot devices and the very unlikely rescues, and overall, it really kills the rhythm to see the cheesiness of how things are done. Some of the relationships and the dialogue is somewhat odd. The time jumps are a little bit odd. Sometimes in many scenes, it doesn't even feel like where they're supposed to, what they're supposed to be doing. When they go back in time in 2024, the tricorders working with iPhones, stuff like that is just cheesy. And I understand they're trying to get ahead, but the melodrama and the goofing on the tech stuff like that, it should remind you when you go back in time of how far apart computers are. If we go back just 10 years, they don't even make iPhone updates for that. If you go 400 years in the past, you're not going to find any software that works the same. I mean, come on, you got to get stuff like that right. So that's one of the things that really doesn't help things. The melodrama, the bizarre hooking into the Matrix, and Jerry Ryan to have to confront her fear as 7 of 9 of going back into the Borg and fighting for her way. All of this stuff could have been revisited in a much more low-key way that didn't rely on simple audiences. And that's the problem, where everything today has to have a stupid history lesson behind it, and they have to dumb everything down because they count on their audience to not pick up on things. So that's pretty much the review of this, folks. Now, we do have one more season. This is going to go through 2023. But season 3 is going to wrap up the series, so we're going to see how it... again, for people who are diehard Trekkies, you do want to see this. For everyone else, steer clear, because its failures are fairly significant.